There we go. Awesome. All right, everyone. Thanks very much. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to deal with the minutes from last week. No, that's the minutes from this week. Okay, here we go. This is the minutes from last week. Should all be up to date. The attendees are on there, and there's a good list of minutes, including the details on wave 1 of ServiceRequest that we discussed as well, including the decisions there. Would anyone like to motion that we approve those minutes?
I'll move, Michael.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Sorry, is somebody scribing today? Can I just follow up on that quickly?
Yeah, I'm scribing, Chris. Who was that seconded? Was that Michael
Michael
Wilson?
Wilson. Yeah, it was me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. All right, great. If we could just raise our hands, please, if we approve the minutes for last week. Thank you. Can anyone see the count of raised hands on their participants window?
Yes, I can. 15 at the moment, 14.
So we go with 15.
17 raised hands with 1 thumbs up. Okay, so it seems stable at 16 raised hands at the moment.
Cool.
Thanks.
It's passed.
Very Australian way of voting with thumbs up.
Yep. Thumbs up. Did anyone want to vote negative for last week's minutes? Please raise your hand now. Some of you still have your hands up.
Not me.
No, I think that's a no. All right, great. Thanks very much. Okay, that's passed. Awesome. All right, let's see if there's any updates on actions from last meetings. No, I don't think there are. Which means, I think...
Over to me.
I think we're ready to go to you, Angus, but
Yeah.
these slides haven't been updated, so I suspect yours are up to date.
Yeah, I tend that I'll share. So if you can stop sharing,
brilliant.
I will share. Share screen. Share the right screen. Okay, so we're really just continuing on from last Thursday's discussion, where we're making initial decisions on elements within the service request resource. So for those who weren't here last time, we've started as of the last meeting to go through this process of making our first ever decisions about the spec. Before last week, we had no spec because no one had made any decision, so we had a blank page. So we walked through a number of decisions last week about the requesting code, that a request must have a patient, that it must have a requester, must have an authored on date, must have a status, must have an intent, and we got to this one here, identifier. And also just recapping from, actually, I might go up to the wave diagram because I'm sure there's probably some people who weren't here last time. So we're going through these, what we're calling waves. So we're still in wave 1, where we're making decisions about the cardinality and must support flag for particular elements within the service request resource. Once we get through wave 1 on the service request resource, we'll start looking at wave 2, and we hopefully will get to the beginning of that this today. And that's where we start looking at not just whether we require this element, but what will that element be? Will it be a string? Will it be some terminology? Will it be a code? So that's wave 2. We roll back over the decisions we've made, and we drill in a little bit further and decide. We've all agreed that we should have a patient, but what is that patient? Is it a patient? Can it be an animal? Things like that. So that'll be wave 2. But we're still at this stage on wave 1. So I'll go down back to where we were, which was identifier. So we got this far. Neil, can I ask you to mute? So service request, sorry, not intent, identifier. So we got this point, and people here last week might have known we had a bit of contention about whether this should be 1 star. Is it mandatory to have a request identifier? And in a V2 sense, this is sort of your placer order number. We're going to, what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about requisition, because I think it's probably worth talking about requisition, which is the group identifier, at the same time we talk about the service request identifier, because they're very similar concepts. And I think if we talk about them both, it might make some people a bit clearer on what the previous one was. And then we may make a decision to defer the previous one's decision for wave 2. And I'll get to why that's the case. So I want to start. So I'll just go back over identifier, and then we'll move to requisition. So service request identifier. So identifier is assigned to the order instance by the orderer and or receiver and or filler. In the base international standard, it's 0.star, so it's optional, but you can have many. This is a business identifier, not a resource identifier. So it's not resource.id, it's service request.identifier. We're just making people aware that in the older V2 standards, this would be called the placer order number. It's not to say that we need a place order number, but that's the same sort of concept, or at least one of the concepts. We tried to do a vote last week on making it mandatory star, and then that got a bit unclear. We were trying to say mandatory as in that you should have a placer order number, but we had contention on this point. We even had sort of 50-50 split as to whether we should or we shouldn't. So I'm just going to we'll come back to this one, but I'm just going to continue on to the next one, which is requisition, because I think it's worth talking about requisition before we make decisions about identifier. So service request requisition is a shared identifier common to all service requests that were authorized more or less simultaneously by the single author, representing a composite or group identifier. And that last word is probably what we typically in Australia would call it, the group identifier. In HL7 version 2, as you see here, placer group number it is called. And really this is a number that is the same across a whole lot of requested items in one request. So a doctor sits down, writes that he wants 3 tests or 3 radiology exams. All 3 would have this one same identifier across all 3 of them. And in a way, it lets you know that these 3 are in a group. They're all ordered together because they all have the same group order number, group identifier on all of them. If there's a different group identifier, then that was ordered in some other requesting event. So that's sort of the context of what it is. And the proposal we had here, and I guess the other important thing to point out here is, back on this slide, is, was it here? I thought somewhere we mentioned that it was the barcode. I'm not saying it now, but this does have, as we move forward to like barcodes, and we're not going to talk about what sort of barcode now, but we strongly believe the barcode identifier will be this requisition identifier. So the thing that someone scans to say, this is the order I want to deal with, it's that value that would be in this position. It would be in couple of positions around the whole grouping of all of them, but really it's the single identifier for a set of tests, one request that a doctor has made. So the decision we're trying to make here is that it's one, that it's must support, and two, there must be one and only one. So I guess we're saying this because we struggle to think how we're going to have a barcode at all if we don't have one identifier to line up to that barcode, although we're not today deciding what the barcode would be. So would someone like to move a motion for both must support yes and cardinal exactly one, or does anyone have any questions?
Can I ask, is there a way to link the other service, the child service requests? Or is that a separate discussion? Like,
so I see this being on all service requests, children, grouper, all of them. It also, no, we're not making a decision on it today. There is a group identifier on the task resource as well. When we get to that, we're proposing that possibly all the same thing. It's really an identifier scattered across everywhere across the request to say this is all the same request. I assume these are all questions. I'll start at the top. Dan.
Yeah, thanks. I guess my thoughts is this probably should be in alignment with the identifier in that it should remain optional. So if the identifier is not present, then nor should this be made to be mandatory.
Okay. What would we use to locate any particular order? So if I have a paper request form with a barcode on it, what is that barcode? I guess I see this as that. And I see it slightly different to this previous one, which was identifier, because identifier is just per order item. Like, let's say full blood count, liver functions, MSU, they'd each have an identifier. They may have an identifier, this concept, 1, 2, 3 even, but all of them would have a group identifier, group 100, like they're all part of the same request.
I'm curious how this then follows into the order, the pathology request group and imaging request group.
Yeah, so it's I guess an identifier representing the same thing. So do we do it purely through structure, or do we also have an identifier on each thing in the structure to say it is all part of? And I guess this is where we have the contention between the FHIR standard doesn't really so much have the concept of a group in the structure. It has this concept, a group identifier. We are proposing in the Australian context that there's always a group. Like we always deal with groups, and therefore we had this idea of a group structure using service request. Which I think, we haven't made that decision yet, but that was something we were proposing. I still think even if we have the structure, you still need an identifier, right? And maybe it's not one-to-one because it doesn't have to be on the children, which is a fair point. I'll go to the others. Or Dan, Did you want to comment more?
No, that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, Jojo?
Thanks, Angus. Yeah, look, I think the idea of a group identifier certainly makes sense, especially when we're talking in context of Rule 3 exemption requests, where a doctor might place a series of 6 tests. At the moment, based on the paper request at the moment, we struggle to manage Rule 3s because we have to today photocopy the results 6 times and allocate to make sure that those are the number of Rule 3 exempt. So I can certainly see that making sense. My question was about, I'm not sure if this has been answered already, but between pathology, diagnostics, imaging, and other services, if a doctor clinician places requests for each of those in that particular encounter, do you see the same grouping being used, group identifier being used, or separate group identifiers for each of those channels or requests?
Yeah, so definitely on that last one, I would see them absolutely as separate channels. So if a doctor wants to order radiology and pathology, that's two, he does it in 2 events. They each have their own independent group identifiers on them. It is really just, in a way, if we sort of vision back to the paper form world, this is like you've picked up a pathology form, you've written 3 tests on it, and that form needs an identifier, and that is the group identifier. Then you pick up a radiology form and you write tests on that, that's another group.
Okay. The other question was, we know that in pathology that the doctor will often add on a test onto the same specimen that has been tested. Could the group identifier be used again for that same test that the doctor requests after the test has been performed? So add an add-on test, for instance.
I absolutely see it that way. So if we've got a lot of detail to get into how we do that, but absolutely, if you were to add another test onto an existing request, then that added on test would have the same group identifier as well, because it is being part of the original group. It's just been added later. The detail, of course, has to be fleshed out on that, but conceptually, yeah, I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Daniel.
Yeah, look, first of all, I really understand the intent and support the intent of this. I think my question is around whether it should be mandatory in terms of when you're getting individual requests coming through. And I guess I'm reflecting back to many years' experience working with HL72X, and sometimes you get a group identifier and no individual identifier. Sometimes you get the individual identifiers without a group identifier. And there are use cases where the request will be for a single request, single service. And should there then be an overhead to have to put in a group identifier on top of the other identifier as well?
Yeah, great points. And I guess, and this comes back to our decision we were trying to make on service request identifier. And I guess the points you make are sort of sing to my beliefs that I too have seen where you get one, not the other, and vice versa. And it's my belief is that I'd like to see both of these mandatory, so that you get the individual identifier and you get the group identifier, and there's no wishy-washy as between you get one or the other one. Or and in the scenario of ordering one test, well, you just get one group identifier and one test identifier. Like, it doesn't hurt to have, we're not at we can create identifiers at will. It's not like they cost money. So then you have this concrete relationship between a test has a group.
I guess I can see that you could reuse one identifier in both locations, but it does cost in terms of software development to track 2 sets of business identifiers. If there's no reason to do so. I understand the many cases that there is good reason to do so, and I just I'm maybe just looking at each case. So thanks for answering anyway.
Brett?
Oh yeah, just on that one, I think there's an upside to having just one way to deal with every request, even if there's an extra identifier that you don't particularly need if it's a single item. But just as a plug for making this mandatory, it does mean you can take an instance of a service request and know which group it belongs to without needing to have any other resources available to be able to make that that linkage between the items. So I think there's an upside to having it present in every item's data there, because it means you can take that single resource and have the whole context of the group available to you.
Yeah, it certainly allows you in a search sense. You can say, give me all service requests where requisition ID is ID 10, and it returns the set, so which is your group. Sanjit?
Yeah, Angus, just an observation. Not all vendor systems support a requisition or group number. So just making it mandatory means that the vendors would have to make changes to support this, which will not be as straightforward. It will lead to wholesale changes across the database as well.
Yep.
Mandatory probably makes it tougher to implement.
It's a fair point, and it comes back. Yeah, it's about scope of what's the spec for. Yeah, it's a good point, because we might see it's mandatory in a sense that in some ordering sense across all organizations where we need a barcode that is a consistent identifier to find the request. But is that true in a hospital? It's
because even to support search would mean we would need to ensure we are able to link this requisition group number to individual order numbers. Again, that sort of becomes challenging.
yeah.
How do you support groupings of orders in your system at the moment? There must be a way, or do you treat every order as an individual request?
No, each
Sure.
order has an individual request, but I'm talking about requisition where it's multiple tests.
Mm-hmm. But there's nothing at a high level that you currently capture and group those requests together in your system?
I would need to check. I'm just saying, I mean, not all the vendors might support it, but making it mandatory, we would enforce it on all service providers. Oh, sorry, all when software providers.
Yeah, I've certainly seen some years ago Cerner systems struggling with this concept, and yet in Australia, trying to use their systems, we were doing things like if all the orders were requested at the same date and time to the second, then we'll treat that as a group, which, you know, for me was just us fighting against it. It really speaks to this difference between America and us. In America, they don't really see groups. They see it like one-to-one. It's a bit like accounting. You want one of those, it's $20. You want one of those, it's $30. You want one of these, it's $10. And everything's just like singular orders, right? But here, because of our Medicare system, we very much group stuff. We talk about the service for the day, the groupings. And I think this is there's this contention between what FHIR's kind of given us and what we do here in Australia. Chris?
Yeah, I'm kind of not sure what point I'm making here, but I think maybe this comes back to must support. So when we think about must support, it doesn't mean that the element is mandatory in your system. It means that if you are dealing with FHIR, if you are exchanging FHIR and you have this number or you can handle this number, then you must support it. You can't choose not to support it. In making it must support though, we're sending a signal kind of about repositories. So we need to think about how these records are going to be stored and exchanged between organizations. Imagine you have two repositories and they both contain a group of orders. The state of those orders in those repositories could be different, and you're going to want to know how those orders relate to each other and how you resolve those changes. In making an element like this must support, we can reduce the number of ways in which the state or the two things can be in different states and determine how we're going to resolve those really quickly and easily. And I think that's really critical. If you're consuming an order and you don't support a requisition number, that's fine. You kind of don't need to at that point, right? But if you've got a barcode coming to you, you've got to be able to find the order and you've got to pull that from a repository. And if we don't have a way of identifying that, then the system is kind of not going to work. So, you know, I think that's what we're asking in must support, and that's what people need to think about.
Michael? You're on mute, Michael.
Yeah, found the mute button. Just want to sort of bring this back as well to that patient choice and the ability for the patient to be able to find the order. That we absolutely need a mechanism for that. So, and that is what this would really be, is that place a group number, that barcode or that code that essentially can be used by the patient to say, this is my request and I'm assigning it to someone or giving them the barcode so that they can find it. So that's one of the key reasons for this being mandatory, is that's the mechanism you'll use to find these tests that have been created for that patient. So if we don't make this mandatory, we need some other mechanism to be able for the patient to be able to view and manage the group of service requests that have their tests on them that they need to turn up somewhere to have done. So I think, yeah, if we're not making it mandatory, we need to work out what that mechanism is. What's the thing that the patient's going to use to be able to manage this request.
We'll need to make something else mandatory instead.
That's right. So yeah, but we need to have an idea of what that is, because that's what this is intended for. That's what I think it might just help to, Angus, if you just went back to the definition on it too, just so that we're making sure, yeah, in the context of that.
Matt?
Yeah, sorry, I just had to find the mute button there. Yeah, I think I agree with you about being mandatory. The way I'm sort of seeing this is, and from the lab perspective, I would view this as an episode number, as the whole request form. This is my understanding of it. But I guess in the eRequesting world, that ID is generated by the requester rather than the lab, because currently the lab assigns the barcode when they receive the bit of paper. eRequesting, I guess, that identifier for the whole request comes there. But yeah,
Is
that,
the episode
am I right?
is the episode identifier a mandatory for R1? If this is,
so I'd caution from calling this episode ID.
Yeah.
So this it is somewhat akin to an episode, right?
Yeah.
In a pathology
No, I'm
system.
just trying to put it to
But
how
it's
the lab would use
independent.
it.
It's very independent to a laboratory's episode. So a laboratory gets, if you sort of correlate it back to the paper world, a laboratory gets a paper request with 3 tests on it. Now that lab, generally 90% of the time, would then create an episode for those 3 tests, right? But they don't have to, right? They could say, oh, we're going to do the first 2 on this episode. That urine we didn't get, we're going to say, leave that, we're waiting till we get that. And that might go on another episode, right? So the grouping of the doctor's view of what he groups together doesn't equal the laboratory's grouping of how they do it. It may do, and often it does, but there's no requirement that says because the doctor said do these 3 tests that the lab must do those on the same episode. They can do them how they see fit. So it does often correlate, but it's not locked in together.
No, I think that's what I was thinking, that because it originates with the requester, not the lab. So yeah, that's good.
It's really the requesters. It's expressing that intent that these are all ordered in one event. What people do with that is for how their systems work. But this identifier is expressing that these are all ordered together. And I agree 100% with Michael. We believe we're going to need this barcode, a token, a thing that people carry around and say, hey, I want to do this thing, or, and people are going to have to scan that, read that, do whatever they do, and look up, what do I need to do for this barcode? And it's this identifier will be that barcode. And when you say what tests are for this barcode, it's going to return back the set. These are all the tests for that barcode. If we don't have that in a mandatory sense, then what is a request? Like, are we going to say to patients, oh, you need to keep 3 numbers, 1 for each item on the test? Like, I don't think we're proposing that. And there's no magic. They can't just roll up and say, I just want my pathology test done, and we're going to go, well, which one? We need an identifier or something that groups them together. Brett, I think you were next.
Yeah, I was just going to back up what Michael and you are saying. I think part of it's we do have use cases that say there will be a token. So I guess the question is, what is that token? And from a patient's perspective, we're essentially thinking of it as essentially one request, which is a group of requests that they've been asked to do, is, I think, pretty natural. It's also notable, I think, that if you do want to have individual items, if you like, as separate requests, you can set them up that way and run through as individual requests anyway. Each identified separately if you that's what your system wants to do. And I just, it is worth thinking about just like, say we compare e-prescribing. E-prescribing has essentially gone down, even though in the old days you get, even in the current days, you get a list of medications on a single script. E-prescribing has opted to have each script item be an individual entity with its own token. So that is another way to go. Yep. So these are all things I think to consider. But I think the thing is, if there's value in the grouping and the way people want to interact with it, I think it's a useful thing to have.
Jojo?
Thanks, Angus. I want to come back to the idea of the grouping. I think it makes sense for all pathology requests, service requests that are, all service requests that have been ordered under the same episode or encounter to be under the grouping, simply for the fact that at the moment today, we know that the consumer will walk in with a paper request form with that multiple service requests on a particular paper request form. They don't have the ability at the moment to go and say, I want my FBC done at one provider and take my EUC to another provider, or shop around, or take pretty much divide that request up. So we would be wanting to understand, when the activation occurs, is it on the group identifier or on the service request itself? Because that would also help determine, what would be mandatory for R1. In my opinion, I think it would make sense to have the group identifier be the token that gets activated, so that not more than one provider can be splitting up that group identifier. And I hope that that's the way that this group see this working as well. But I'd be happy to hear the comments.
Yeah, no, I like the way you've put it there, because that's how I see it. I see this is that thing that says, this is the top of the pyramid token. And you're, as you said, if one lab claims that and is collecting against it, then it's theirs. The other labs can't, right? Because it's too far. They've acted upon it. So if the patient, for whatever reason, went to this collection center, had their bloods taken, and then somehow took that form to the opposition or another lab, then that lab, when they scanned it, it should go, no, like it's already been done.
It's correct, yeah.
Michael?
Yeah, I was just wanted to say, though, that having this requisition doesn't constrain any of those decisions further down, right? So like we said, this is the places identifier. Sorry, places identifier. So this is, they created them together. So how we manage how they're filled, how they're processed further down, we have flexibility, and absolutely maybe one choice that, this is the key. And once you take, as a placer, as a filler, you take this on, then it's locked to you. But we have flexibility, and this is on the base request, right? By having this means that if you have one service request and you have a requisition, that's fine. If you want to have multiple, then you can have multiple service requests all with the same requisition. You can add same service request number. You can add more later. So I think this gives us plenty of flexibility, but making it mandatory means that we have that flexibility. If we don't make it mandatory, we can't slice and dice this how we need to later. So just on that, trying to bring this to head, I'd like to make the motion that we actually do make this mandatory, and we do make it must support, so 1-to-1 and must support.
I certainly second that.
I third that.
Okay, so we've got a call for a motion.
Just before we do so, can I just ask something here?
Yep.
So not opposing putting it forward, but to me there is a dependency here with how we treat the other identifier.
Yep.
And I would like to, my position on this identifier will depend on on the other one. If we're voting on both of them, that's great. But if we take them piecemeal and then we decide, well, I would have voted differently had we not gone ahead with the other one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going to propose that we defer the other one, but vote on this one. But I'll hear from Sanjay if he's had his hand up for a while.
I guess, I mean, first and foremost, I agree. I mean, I don't disagree that it's not mandatory. Yes, it is mandatory. I'm just saying a bit more research analysis is needed to identify what all impacts it will have, to assess the timelines, and then get feedback across the ecosystem, across the service providers. And more importantly, I think my question was more around the previous point that you made, as far as the requisition number comes from the placer, but the service provider, is it possible scenario wise that a requisition might have multiple tests and not all tests can be handled by the same provider, and some tests might have to be served by another handled by another provider? In that case, how would billing work? Because you're saying there's a one-to-one mapping here. Is there
This
such
doesn't constrain the billing though. So this is just the group created by the placer. All the downstream rules about what that means for fillers and that, this doesn't constrain any of that. It's just saying that when the placer created it, they created this group together and gave it to the patient as a group. So there's no constraints that we're making decision here by making this mandatory about what happens downstream on that.
But going to that second point, that I don't think that's a valid scenario, because the lab deals with that, with the sendaways process, unless someone's got another opinion on that.
I'm kind of with Michael that this. I'm with. There's two Michaels, who's the problem. Mikey Baldwin, you're right, but I think Michael Wilson's point kind of wins, because this says nothing about how you process it. It's literally recording the fact that the person who created this order created this all at once. What people then do, just because we're saying, yeah, he ordered these all together, doesn't inflict anything on the downstream systems. They can do what they want. We're just telling them these were ordered together. So you're right about sendaways. We all manage that in the lab, but we don't even need to talk about sendaways, because this makes no inference on what you will do. It just says the person who ordered this ordered them together. I'll go to, I think, Andy. He's a long way away. You on mute, Andy?
Is that better?
That's better.
I think this does have implications for fulfillment, in that we are not, I think, looking at allowing for grouped orders to be split. So
But
it
this
isn't.
decision here doesn't impact that. That's a decision we make further down.
It does impact it when we make a decision about a single group. And it's I agree, it's fundamental, but I mean, I think we have to I guess acknowledge that for Australia, that the whole funding model and policy model is built around the concept of a set of requests that are treated as a group. And we don't have a process whereby you individually order single tests. I also think we have to be careful not to take the existing paper-based world and constrain ourselves in a digital sense by adopting only those approaches which would work in a paper world. That's probably a bit of a parallel thing. In my mind, I can clearly understand a business need for a group identifier. I am in the other camp where unless you're looking at backward compatibility to version 2, I'm yet to hear an argument for a business need for an individual test identifier.
Which is the other one. Yep.
Yep.
David, he got.
Yeah, I'm a supporter of this, because if I'm looking down the track at what might happen, and I say this really clearly might happen, may one day be a possibility. I could imagine this being really useful for funders to figure out the grouping of tests. It doesn't, as Michael Wilson said, it doesn't cost us anything now. It doesn't constrain us in any way. But certainly down the track, if we want to try and make sense of how to pay for tests, understanding how they're all grouped together in a really simple way is absolutely critical. We need it. Government just can't, you can't now go from a world that is having all of your tests grouped together because they're part of one request already on paper, to now a world where everything is split up into individual tests and not grouped, because the legislation and the payment is all still based around the grouping.
David? Oh. Oh, lost David.
Yeah, all I was going to say was if you're trying to understand how requesters behave and if you're trying to understand clinical practice, then you're going to want to know what a particular doctor wrote on a request at a point in time. So you're going to want a way to group all these together if you're going to try and cut the starter up later on for academic purposes as well.
So I guess what I wanted to do was vote on this one, but the previous one, which was this one, I think is still more contentious. So can we maybe let's have a vote on this and see what the outcome of that vote is?
Could I ask why the individual test identifier is contentious? I would have thought that's fundamental for any kind of computable, resolution or decision making about a test.
Andy, do you want to comment on that? I know you're an objector of it.
Yeah, I notice Heath's not here to help out. This is not to say an individual test is not identifiable. It's simply saying, is there a need to be able to present a individual test identifier that is human kind of meaningful to any role within fulfillment? So it's not to say, for instance, that the receiving lab can't distinguish the tests because there is a FHIR ID provided. Whereas there is nothing like that for a group identifier. There is no mechanism in FHIR to group those things together based around the service request itself. And the service request group identifier is a implied grouping based around the existence of a requisition ID. Whereas the individual tests, they have an ID, so they're identifiable. I can request a test, I can look one up, I can do all that stuff with it. But what's not clear is that there is a fundamental business need to present the some kind of business identifier, aka a something like a IHI or a Medicare number or a one of those identifiers which is kind of readable and usable outside of the technical implementation. Technically, we're fine. We know we can identify it, we can request it, we can search for it, all of that stuff. It really comes down to where is the use case for the discovery based around some kind of human readable name. Like we've got the test code, we know all that stuff. We know it's within a certain order from a group identifier. We know that they're different because each one is uniquely ID'd from a FHIR perspective. But again, we're not treating those tests individually. From a placer perspective, they're not allowing that test to live in our sense here with the group identifier without being associated with an order. Because for Australia, unlike the US, which they don't really need the group to be a first-class citizen, they pay for tests one by one by one by one by one. They don't need the group to represent the combination. Now, in terms of the clinical relationship between those tests, yeah, you could have a common link to an encounter potentially, which would give them the consistent shared context. But yeah, again, that's kind of my reasoning why we do it. And most of the discussion I've heard has always been, well, version 2 did it, so therefore we need to do it.
I've got comments, but I'll go to, I think Chris was first.
Just had a question, more of an implementation detail, but it may affect identifier. Is it possible that the same test in 2 different FHIR repositories could have a different FHIR ID?
That was exactly the point I was going to make.
Same point I was going to make.
If you've got a group with a full blood count and a hemoglobin, and in the future we decide we want to let people cancel the full blood count, and people are then storing those FHIR resources in other repositories, how are you ever going to identify the full blood count? By using the code, which would be a terrible way.
Yep. So that implies that this must exist.
No. You can do it. It's already it would already have an identity through the order, so it's a relative identity based around the group identifier.
But so if I've taken the service request, the whole set of service requests, and I've taken them from the order repository and I've put them into another FHIR repository, my back end one, and then you come to me and say, I want to cancel the full blood count. I'm like, and you go, oh, resource ID 5. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not resource ID 5 in my server. It's now been re-identified. I have no concrete identifier to an item on the order. And to me, that's boxing us into yeah, you could say, oh, we don't need that now. But if we don't need it now, I worry we box ourselves into a corner in the future, because when we go, oh, we need to do something to that individual item, we're like, how do we identify it? And all the systems now don't have concrete identifiers for each item. And we're like, it's a breaking change across everyone going, now you needed individual identifiers because we want to be able to tell you to do something to one of them.
Yeah, without this group identifier, using the FHIR protocol and release 1, you can expect to make more calls. You'll be making more calls to each individual test if we're only using the single identifier for the service request. So you'd have to go in and call, and cancel all those. It could be supported, but it just be a very chatty service.
I think Daniel was first. Sorry if I'm getting the order wrong.
Just real quickly there, two points. One is, if you look at the fundamental FHIR descriptions around how resource identifiers should be used as against business identifiers, it makes it really clear, I believe, that they're not there for the purpose that Andy is suggesting. They're there for managing things within FHIR. They're not predictable. Depending on the server, you cannot always preset a particular resource ID. And in fact, in most systems, in my experience, you can't do that. So and this is my second point, I guess, the use case that he was requesting, if, as in many cases, EMR's ordering systems are not 100% FHIR based, but have a FHIR interface, they will already have their own internal IDs for requests that are being sent out. And there is a need to be able to use those for the purpose of managing the deletions, the updates, the things that might take place in the life cycle of a request. I see that as fundamental. Obviously, if everybody was using the same one FHIR repository, we could get by with using the resource IDs, but even then, we're not really doing what FHIR is intended to do in doing that.
Michael?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we could come back around. The service request identifier is the identifier for the individual test in an order, right? And the one we were talking about now is the requisition, which is something that would link that individual test to a group. So I think we can make a decision on this requisition and still come back to whether identifier on each individual test is must support or the cardinality required on that without having to go back to that. We can come back to that later. I think we can make a decision on requisition now. So I'm just wondering if we can make that vote on the.
I second that. Like I think we should try and make this vote, but defer the other. I think the other is more potential to be optional. This one I really struggle with. Well, I feel we should be able to make a decision on this one.
Okay.
So
yep, I think we might call a vote on this one.
So can I move a motion that we vote on both the must support and the cardinality of 1-to-1 for requisition, what we sort of know as the group.
All right. Okay. If you would like to vote in the affirmative that we support must support and cardinality of 1 for service request requisition, please raise your hand.
Chris, we better get a second.
Yeah,
oh, there you go.
Say, who seconded
we got one. Yeah,
we already had it originally. I think we just kept talking about it. So.
Yeah, cool.
Someone could keep a count. We need 19.
We're doing is literally counting them, are we?
Steph's got the count, I think.
Seems stable at 25.
Open for
24, sorry.
A few more seconds.
Back up to 25. Yep, we'll call it there. Thanks.
25. All right. Put your hands down, please.
Okay. And I know Danielle mentioned this in our earlier meetings that we probably need to have a vote and that we're going to defer this. That we're
sorry. Can we take the negative as well, please?
Oh, sorry.
For the vote. Yeah. Otherwise. Yep.
My bad.
All right. Michael, your hand is up. All right. We're going to now vote. If you would like to vote negative, that service request identifier should be must support and have a cardinality of 1.
No, it's requisition. Sorry, I had the wrong screen. Yep.
Wrong screen. Service request requisition should have must support and a cardinality of 1. Please raise your hand now. We currently have 1 negative. Okay, 1 negative, and we'll call that one there.
Right. So I think we want to take a vote that we're going to defer this one to wave 2. So this is really not a vote on whether it's must support or cardinality 1. It's a vote that we move on and we defer this decision. So I move a motion that we defer this decision.
Angus,
to wave 2.
We don't need a motion for this one. I just don't think you're proposing that we move this to there. And if anyone's got any objections or want to make any comments about that now, we don't need to formally vote on just moving it further down to another meeting.
So if anyone would like to raise an objection to deferring the discussion on identifier, please raise your hand now.
And I'll just clarify. So the idea is to defer this to when we talk about the type. So we'll do that together with what type of identifier it is, how many you can have, and just roll all those up together to the wave 2 discussion on this. So that we can talk about the cardinality again when we're talking about the data types as well.
Yeah, it's very hard making a decision on a 1 when you're not talking about which one.
Yep. Dan Ormerod, your hand is raised. Did you have something you wanted
to say? Just after thinking through all these conversations, resource ID versus identifier versus group identifier. I think we possibly could, well, I'm open to changing my vote on whether or not we need to push this to another meeting. I'm now in the opinion that I would support the cardinality of 1 to many on an identifier, and having this conversation fresh in everyone's mind. I'm just seeking if anyone else has had a change of opinion, and if we can move to vote on the cardinality. Also happy for it to be pushed forward.
I hear you, but I think possibly there's not a strong enough understanding of what this number's actually doing yet. Especially with the multiple cardinality, people have talked about, you know, this being a service request identifier. They've talked about it coming out of their own systems. You know, there probably needs to be a tighter definition around what this is before we can have that discussion, and maybe we need to talk about type in order to do that.
Yeah, I feel like it's difficult. Like it's a hard decision to make, because I agree, Dan. Like it's fresh in our minds, but there's also the problem with making a decision here and saying one is which one. Like, because there's the fill order number, place order number, like there's the order from the person placing the order. There's an order from the lab that they assign to it. I'm worried that if we make a decision of, whenever you say 1.* and then just make a decision about whether it should be 1.* without talking about which one, it's like, you know, because it's one or many. So which one's the one that's the mandatory one? You kind of have to talk about the type. But I do also appreciate that it's kind of fresh in our minds. We just had the discussion. I think we're going to have to go over it again.
Yeah, I think you know, if you look at a patient identifier, there's multiple identifiers for them. So I can accept that you have multiple identifiers for a service request. That works in my mind. But okay, let's move on and we carry your motion.
So I think we're happy to defer this to when we talk about the type. So wave 2, which will be the end of this or the next meeting, we'll talk more about the identifiers that are possible, and then we'll make a decision about which one is mandatory. So we move on then. Hopefully we can get past these identifier ones. Something fresh. So moving on. So this is a completely new element. This is categories, all right? Service request category. So a code that classifies the service request for searching, sorting, and display purposes, e.g. surgical procedure. I don't think we'll be using surgical procedure in this context. In the base standard, it's optional, used for filtering what service requests are retrieved and displayed. So for us, we really see this as how you're going to distinguish between pathology or radiology. In the code system, there is one for laboratory procedure, there's one for imaging, right? So we see that we need support for both diagnostic imaging and pathology. The proposal is that it's 1.* again, and I'm now going to go against the argument I just made in the other one. So we're saying 1.* because at a minimum, we think you need to say, this is a pathology order, and the other one, this is a radiology order. It doesn't mean you can't add other stuff. You can say this is a pathology order, and I'm not suggesting we would. You could say and hematology, but I'm not suggesting we do that. But I'm just highlighting you can put other codes in there as well, but we need something so that a sorting system can go, that's pathology, that's radiology, pathology, radiology, radiology. And this is that property. So the proposal is that it's must support, we must get something, because otherwise systems are going to be going, I don't know, is it pathology or radiology? And that it's 1.* saying you can add other stuff, but it must have one of them. I think when we get into detail, we'll say you can't put both. But at this stage, we think it's mandatory to have something to tell us whether it's pathology or radiology. Would someone like to move a motion on this one?
I'll move it.
I'll move it.
Yep. Thank you. I'll certainly second it.
I'll second it.
Here we go. Someone else can second it.
All right, great.
Who was the person that moved it beside me?
I seconded it,
Michael. Oh, Jojo. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. All right. So we're going to vote again. If you would like to vote in the affirmative, that servicerequest.category is must support and has a cardinality of 1 to many, please raise your hand.
Right. 26 votes.
26. Yep, that looks good. Thank you. Just wait for everyone to put their hands back down again. Still 3 hands up, Michael, Caleb and Kathleen. Thank you. All right, if you would like to vote in the negative, that service request category is must support yes and cardinality 1 to many, please raise your hand. No hands raised. And I think that's negative against. Thank you. That one is passed.
Thank you, Chris. I knew they could all be that easy. I'm sure this one won't be. So the next one is body site. So service request body site, anatomical location where the procedure should be performed. This is the target site. It gets a code, obviously, or a codable concept, so that allows for codes and text. Knowing where the procedure is performed is important for tracking if multiple sites are possible. From our requirements out of Sparked, in lots of the requirements, they'd say things like the requesting clinician requires diagnostic imaging requesting clinician requires diagnostic imaging for a patient following a consultation about an affected body part. And furthermore, they mentioned body part again. Down the bottom, we had even more requirements, really going into the detail about the body site. We're not talking about
Angus, can I just that bit at the bottom is actually lifted from the AU core spec, some draft material, and that was to indicate that different systems may have like pre-coordinated primary codes that include body site details. So that's really indicating that the body site element itself may be optional, depending on your system, the requesting system, but that's up for discussion. That's how we landed in AU core.
Yeah, so there might be a service request code like left foot X-ray, and therefore the question is, do we need a body site as well if the code is left foot X-ray?
Exactly.
So the proposal putting forward here is that it's optional, that it's must support. So if you do have a body site in your ordering system, like you capture it, then you have to provide it, but it's optional to provide. And yeah, cardinality 0 to 1. I think, yeah, and to your point, Brett, if the code is left foot X-ray, then do we make the doctor also go to body foot site and say foot? Yeah, it's debatable.
It's not something we'd enforce, hey Angus. It's not something we'd enforce in our system. So we've got the field there, but it's never used basically. So I mean, we support it, but yeah, it's pretty much 0 the whole time. And yeah, like you say, we've got all our codes in FHIR body site pretty much.
I also know from working on the My Health record, we had all sorts of trouble with this property in that the original CDA specs made it mandatory, and then lots of organizations couldn't provide it, and then we had exemptions for them not providing it, and then eventually they changed the spec to make it optional. I'll go to Dan.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get clarity. Is this change for diagnostic imaging aspects only and not for pathology?
Yeah, that's my bad. Yes, so as it's saying here, proposal for diagnostic imaging only. So I've got some points on that. So this decision is only for diagnostic imaging, but it's a fair point that some might want to raise. What do we say about pathology? Because the decision we're making here is only for diagnostic imaging, is what's being proposed.
Thank you.
Sorry, Brett?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on the cardinality here, and just to point out that it's maximum 1. So we're talking about 1 body site per request, because the natively, I think you can have multiple in the service request resource. So yeah, the intent is to have a single body site per request in this usage. Yeah.
Ilya, sorry, I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Yeah, hi everybody. I would like to add some notes regarding this like option when code itself contains a body part. I think in this case, you still should provide body site explicitly, because when you build some reporting, some like software for clinical decision support and so on, usually you rely on standard FHIR fields like body site, and it will be more beneficial for other software to be sure that body site always will be filled, and you don't need to check codes for some specific codes that already contain a body site. So it's a kind of data duplication, but I think it's required to ask implementers to fill body site, even if code contains information about body site. Yeah.
Thanks. Michael. I'll just do Michael's. Wilson.
Yeah, just to clarify here, I mean, we haven't gone into it. We're going to go into it more later about this must support, though, on an optional. So what this is really saying is, if you have it in your system, you should provide it, right? Doesn't mean your system has to have it, doesn't mean your system has to manage it, but if you have it, you should provide it. So I think that's the context here. And I'm just also questioning here then about that diagnostic imaging only, because if it is valid for another request and your system has it, why wouldn't you provide it, right? So about this being a generic service request, that if body site is relevant and you have it in your system, then provide it. It's not a mandatory field, it's not one-to-one, but if you have it, you should provide it. So just wondering about also the diagnostic imaging only. If there are other requests this would be relevant for, then you should provide it.
Michael Osborne.
I think we'll get more into this in wave 2. But I think if you do provide it as a separate field, there's a chance that those will get out of alignment. And it's kind of a patient safety thing here. It's probably safer to map from one field than from multiple fields.
Sanjit.
More of a question, Angus. I mean, is there any use case that supports body site being 0 for imaging?
I think the use being 0. So the use case we'd said where the code, so ServiceRequest.code says left foot X-ray.
Yeah.
So you could be 0 there. Like, do you have to ask again, given it's embedded in the code? Is there any? I'm not off the top of my head. I can't think of another reason. I think there's always a body site. It's just how are you communicating it?
I mean, again, the reason I'm asking is if there's a valid use case, then is this a conversation that needs to be had?
I think to Ilya's point, it's, do we enforce that it's got to be here as well? Like, left foot X-ray, body site, foot. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, but then we are getting into laterality, right?
I dropped that off for purpose, but there is another property called laterality.
not every system can do that. That has pre-coordinated codes. Yeah.
Keith? Or Kenneth, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. With regard to both radiology and pathology, I mean, the request code, let's say it's biopsy or ultrasound or X-ray, and we're saying that each of those codes needs to have, one of the options is to have each of those codes have the body part encoded in the request code. This just seems to be like, this, let's say for skin biopsy, there might be 100 different sites for skin biopsies. So to put it in the request code creates an incredible lot of duplication for the term biopsy, as it does for X-ray or ultrasound or anything else. So it's much easier to use a generic body site coding together with a service request than to code body sites within the service request. And it does apply to pathology, because a biopsy without a code of where it came from is useless.
Yeah, I also would like to expand this to pathology. I think in much the same way. Swabs in pathology, and again, it's must support 0 to 1. We're not saying everyone must provide a site for pathology. It's just if you have a site, give it to us. I'll go back to Ela. Isla, sorry. No, his hand down. Jojo?
Thanks, Angus. Yes, I was going to say the same thing about pathology. So reiterating your point that when we are looking at a use case for a requisition entry where we haven't seen the patient, we, as a service provider, we haven't collected the specimen from the patient and it's been collected by someone else and given to us. In a service request where that specimen came from, having a body part or body site as part of the container or the specimen, that would be helpful for us. So I would look at expanding this to pathology as well, either as wave 2 or under release 2, but to support those types of use case.
Brett?
Just a couple of points. The FHIR spec explicitly says, I'll just send a link in the chat, that if the service request code is filled,
it says it on this slide.
You shouldn't. Yeah,
slide.
exactly. Just that comment at the bottom. It's only used if not implied in the service request code, right? So it actually explicitly says not to do that. However, that's still optional. The other point I wanted to make is the whole pathology body site thing is, I believe that's really a specimen body site, not a service request body site. Because it's actually a good question, because I guess if the request being made is to take a swab on that body site, that is different than I have taken a specimen, and it's a part of the specimen details. So so if you're requesting a specimen be taken, then it could be something you populate. Yeah. But if you're actually requesting, if you already have a specimen, it should be part of the specimen details, not part of that.
Thanks.
The request body site.
Thanks for clarifying that, Brett.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
You're splitting hairs, but like if a requester says I want to,
I'm not.
if I want a left hand swab,
definition.
and then the specimen is a left hand swab, then that. I mean, he might say I want a left hand swab, and then the specimen says right hand swab, and it's like there's a problem here. Like one is what he wanted,
True.
One is what he got.
True. But yeah, true. I guess you could.
I think
say
it's more
it's
if you say,
redundant then.
Yeah, I think it's more if you say you've got a wound swab. Do you want on the left hand or the right hand? They might have 2 wounds.
Yeah, to me, this is what he wants and not what he gets. And specimen, which we've talked a bit about, whether we should have a specimen, but a specimen would be what you took, not what was requested. Hopefully, it is what is what. Hopefully, it is what's requested, but they're different things. One's a request, and one's the action of what was done.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, I think that's a good reason to have it for pathology as well. Then that makes sense.
And I highlight we don't. Well, we do actually. It's in V2. There's a specimen. It's in my experience, it hasn't been heavily used, but every time I mention it through pathology, Ken here just spoke. Every time I bring it up and say, "Should we?" everyone says yes.
Yeah, Angus, should we be putting this off to wave 2 because we really need to have more confidence over imaging codes?
I think so. I think it also comes into discussion, about imaging codes. Whether we're going to use a code set that says left foot or whether we're not is all part of it. It's a fair point, Andy. I mean, it is optional. We're asking for it to be optional. We're not asking for it to be mandatory. So it kind of doesn't. Like, do we think? Does anyone think it should be mandatory? I think Ilya mentioned he would like it to be mandatory.
Yes, I would like to have it mandatory.
Yeah.
I strongly disagree.
We had a discussion in AU Core about this too, and it's whilst everyone would probably like it to be mandatory, there's a lot of systems that will have difficulty managing that if they've got pre-coordinated concepts. There's no easy way to imply the body site from the pre-coordinated concept unless you've got some terminology smarts or the ability to do that. Yep.
I think that's where the must support though adds some strength to it. So if you have it, you should provide it, right? So again, we haven't gone into a lot of the definition around that must support. And then on the other end, if it is provided, you should be able to handle it. But we have to go through that detail later. But I think that's why adding the must support, we're saying it is important for some actors in some scenarios, right? So we're going to define all that later, but that strengthens the 0, right? If it's 0 to 1, we don't really care about it. But this is saying something that we do care about if it's available and it's relevant.
Even if we go to, like, it's still an open question for radiology, or it's maybe not for all, but there's probably going to be a proposal that says that there's going for when you order radiology, you have to say laterality, body site, modality, exam code, right? Even in that scenario where you're broken it all up and you're asking for all these parts, we can't. We're always going to have free text, right? We're always going to have to be, I want you to do this thing, like it, and as soon as you do that, are we then going to, I guess you're going to make it mandatory that even though you're telling us in text what you want to do, you also have to tell us the body site?
No, but it's a codable concept, so it can be text.
The body site can be, yeah.
Yeah.
To me, it's that code. It's as you're saying. Do we defer it to code because a lot of your thinking comes down to what is the thing I'm ordering. If I'm ordering a left foot X-ray, that's the code. It changes your opinion about this. But if I'm just ordering, X-ray, and then here I'm going to say foot, and it's a different proposition, isn't it?
Yes.
Angus,
go.
So I think within context of our radiology system, so I mean, I think it doesn't get used. I think the main way that this information is sort of transfers, but when the code goes downstream to imaging, the code is then used to infer the body site and laterality, right? So I guess that's probably the question I have is like, where is this information actually going to provide value, right?
So Adrian, you represent. So Adrian works at Kestrel Computing, which is a big radiology provider. So when people order in your system, what when they're ordering the thing to be done, what sort of, do you have a combined catalog where they're picking from a list saying left foot X-ray, or are they saying
yes, basically yes, yeah,
so
correct. So the vast majority of the codes that end up in Charisma are coded with the body site and laterality in the code. Yeah, so it's inferred. Yeah,
which then makes me feel you lean towards this is optional because you have it, like because it's there.
Yeah. We fit into the must support and cardinality 0 to 1 at the moment, right? With the current design. Yeah.
Steve.
And as people were saying, sorry, there will be a lot of work to bring up all the codes to standard. There's thousands of them, and every system's got different codes, right? So yeah, there's a lot of manual, like Brett was saying. It's a big problem, that one.
Thanks, Angus. I just wanted to quickly clarify about the cardinality of 1, because if you've got, say, 2 wounds on 2 different body sites, that results in 2 specimens, but presumably there would be one originating, I guess is the word service request. So perhaps you would need cardinality of more than 1 to indicate that, there's a wound on the left hand and I want to swab from that, and there's a wound on the left forearm and I want to swab from that as well.
So I would have pictured that as 2 service requests always. So if you want a wound swab left hand, wound swab right hand, then they're 2 independent service requests, each with their own body site code if we're going to have one.
Under the same grouping identifier, hopefully.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sorry, I would like to clarify regarding my point. So if there is a service request and this service request contain body part as part of the code, must support will force vendor to also put body site in body site. Correct?
It would, yes.
No, not necessarily.
Oh no,
Because
must
it's
support won't. No, it's mandatory.
No, must
Yeah,
support
sorry.
won't.
Yeah, no, must
Yeah,
support
must
won't.
support one.
No, must support won't. Because it's, even though it's logically the same thing, it's not, it doesn't mean your system has stored body site and knows the specific body site, right? So it's only if your system actually can determine that. Could it
But
populate it?
this information is contained in code.
Yes, I know, but that doesn't mean your system can distinguish the body site out of that code to put in a separate field element.
I think we should force this scenario.
I think
you think
though,
it should be
going back
what?
to
Ely, you
what?
think it should be 1.1? Is that right? You think must
So
support?
I understand I understand that some systems they may not have any information about body site at all, or maybe there are some cases when body site is not required. So in this case, maybe 0.1 is fine. But I don't want end up in the situation when system provide me service request. The service request should contain body site like X-ray for left leg, but the only way to get this information is to get this from the code. So if external system know particular body site through some like code or whatever, they should extract it to body site.
But I don't think must support says that you need to parse codes, but you can't just because they pick a code that's left X-ray, or sorry, foot X-ray, doesn't my assumption is must support doesn't then imply that that system must be able to interpret the code foot X-ray in order to populate body site. Like you could argue they have body site, it's just compounded into their code, but I don't see must support enforcing that you must now be able to semantically understand, foot X-ray and populate body site with foot.
Okay,
Michael, that's your understanding as well. Like just because it's
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. But it doesn't have to understand the code. But if it does understand it and can do that, that's fine. But that must support isn't going to tell you have to do that.
If the system already stores body site as an atomic property somewhere in its system because it collected it from someone, then it must provide it.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here. There's a great discussion, but we're at 12:30 and we need to wrap it up.
We are.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So for those who have to leave, the next one is on the 20th, Thursday, the 20th of June, where I think we'll be arguing further about body site. But it's been really good today, and we've moved forward on requisition, so that's great, and it has some other good discussions. So we will come back to those. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. I think we could probably stop the recording now.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everyone. It was a bit slow going today, but